What is going on, everybody? Welcome back. Welcome back. Welcome back, y'all. I'm super excited to have this conversation here with y'all today about some DEI stuff with one of the most incredible pushers of DEI work that I personally know. So I'm gonna go ahead and check my audio really quick before we jump into this and just make sure everything sounds good. Sounds like we are. So I'm gonna go ahead and bring on Miss Shayna Marie to the stream. How are you, Shayna?
Hello, hello. I am doing about as well as we all can be doing considering the state of the world, but
Yeah,
I'm happy to be here for sure. How
that's
are you
what's
doing?
up. I'm good. I'm good. Thank you for joining us. I'm super excited to let everybody know a little bit more about all the work that you've been doing. Because this isn't something that you just started doing. You've been doing it for a while, and I'm excited to kind of let people know some of the different things you have going on. So, can you start by just giving us like a quick intro, background, and yeah, let us know who you are.
Sure. Hey, I am Shayna Marie. Some people know me as Shayna Akonki Marie, and I'm out here in Grand Rapids, Michigan. I've been doing DEI work pretty much my whole entire life. My whole existence has been DEI work. And so I grew up way west Michigan, made my way to Grand Rapids. But I really think that for me, my passion for DEI started back in 2015. I was going to college. I was in a multicultural sorority and was really involved in some of the DEI stuff happening on campus. And just from that moment on, decided that this was the career path and way that I wanted to go. So I started a platform called Reaching Beyond Bias and been chipping away at growing that audience and building my content and all of that ever since. So
Yeah, that's awesome. And DEI is such a big topic. So, can you kind of just I guess just to set the context a little bit, can you tell people what DEI means to you and kind of like what you're referring to when you refer like are speaking on DEI stuff?
yeah, so DEI is an acronym that stands for diversity, equity, and inclusion. And so DEI work can show up in a million different ways depending on the industry, depending on where you are in the world. You know, DEI is a term that we use here in America, but other countries have different terms. And so the language is really just describing work being done to address issues of diversity, issues of equity. And so by diversity, you know, we're thinking race, class, gender, sexual orientation. It could be the neighborhoods you grew up in, you know, rural versus urban. There's so many ways diversity shows up. And so essentially, I see the work that I'm doing as a way to help create a world where anybody from any walk of life can have access to what they need to live a good life, and can feel like they can see themselves in the world around them. So.
Mhm. That's yeah, that's an amazing definition. Um, and so like I guess when you first started getting into this work, like what was it about DEI that kind of like hit home for you or like really drew you to it? I know you said it's been a part of your life, like your entire life, but I guess is there anything in particular, any moments that stood out where you knew that this is kind of the route you wanted to start going down?
Definitely. I think, you know, going back to around that 2015 era, you know, I was a student and I was learning and I was growing. And I remember the first time learning about unconscious bias. And that to me in that moment was just like a light bulb because, you know, we all know that there's social issues out there, whether it be racism or sexism and homophobia and all these things. Um, and it's always hard to pinpoint what is the root cause. And
Mm,
so to me, people's unconscious biases, the unconscious ways that we discriminate discriminate against each other. I felt like if people really understood that and had strategies for, you know, reducing how that bias shows up, then, you know, maybe we stand a chance at really combating some of the more systemic issues that, you know, we continue to deal with. And additionally, I was a peer facilitator in a class, and the topic of the class was race, class, and gender. And so we're breaking this down pretty, you know, basic level stuff. And I'm talking with students from so many different backgrounds and watching those light bulb moments for other students. You know, I was having dialogues where we're not in this class to debate. we're not in this class to prove each other wrong. We're here to listen to the lived experiences of other people and
Mm,
to really understand where those perspectives come from. And so I was able to even see how somebody from Metro Detroit that went to primarily white communities, how they might come to some of the worldviews that they have. And being able to validate that experience, um, it was helping the conversation to go in a way that the takeaway is I am validating your experience no matter how different it is than my own,
mm,
right? And I'm creating space for healing, and I'm creating space for deep understanding of issues. And so I really got excited about the idea of having dialogues with people instead of having debates with people,
mm.
and really coming to some common ground. So yeah, that was about 2015 that I was really going through that, and just continued to find space throughout my career.
Yeah, that's awesome. I love how you say like creating a space to like let others just be heard, pretty much. But I'm curious about like you talked about that on a college campus when you were in school. Can you talk about that also in like what you've seen in other maybe places where you've been or lived or like other organizations? Because I feel like DEI is different depending on where you are, the environment, and yeah, even geographically. So like what were some of the differences maybe between some of the DEI stuff you saw going on with students, the younger demographic, and then maybe like out in West Michigan in general, like the Grand Rapids area?
Yeah, absolutely. I would say that in student movements and on a college campus, it's just a different level of energy. You're around a bunch of young, passionate, energetic folks, and so I think that a college campus is a really great atmosphere for people to find that spark and to find that passion. As you try to apply that into the real world, into the workplace, into your neighborhoods, um, it's a lot more challenging because you realize just how vast the system goes and just how much work is really in store in every asset of our lives, from education to housing to health,
Mm,
right? And so I think in the real world, if you find yourself wanting to do DEI work or engaging in these kinds of conversations, like, it can be really draining and it can be
mm,
really hard to um, make sure that you're in community with the right people that will actually help you achieve the result. On campus, it's as simple as going to the student government, advocating for what changes you want, and then boom,
mhm,
it's pretty easy.
mhm.
Doing that on a city level or on a county level, state level, and national, so on and so forth, it gets deep and it gets really difficult.
Yeah, that's interesting. Because that was gonna be one of the things I was gonna ask you about is like maybe some of the challenges that you've kind of run into, but I think that's a great breakdown of that. Um, so another thing, I don't know if you noticed this, but one of my I want to say issues with some of the DEI stuff is like I feel like a lot of times there's efforts that are made to look inclusive, but maybe not be inclusive. So things like affinity groups sometimes, or I don't know, like you said, those safe spaces. I feel like those are also kind of buzzwords in like the DEI kind of world. And you can put people who look the same in a room together and say that's a safe space or something like that. But how does that look outside of that safe space or that room? Like there's, like you said, there's a lot of other kind of red tape sometimes. So I guess like, have you noticed anything like that? Sort of this maybe this attempt at DEI, but maybe not it not being effective.
Yeah, I think there's probably a lot of examples of that in the real world. And for one, when we talk about safety, safety should be a little bit deeper than what we see at the surface, right? Um, Safety in the workplace or wherever you are, it's really about that psychological safety,
Mm,
um, and just having a space and putting Black people in a space doesn't inherently make your work environment safe, right? Like,
mm,
so just reserving space for minorities in your workplace, like, that's not enough. You have to create a culture where psychological safety is there, meaning people can show up as their authentic selves and be next to people who are completely different than themselves, and they're showing up completely differently than I would, and that's okay.
Mm-hmm.
So that's, I think, a big piece. And I do see a lot of what I would call, I guess, racial capitalism, where you have companies and organizations and institutions really playing on all of these buzzwords, and they're putting out diversity statements and all of this stuff. But then when you peel back that layer and you talk to the people of color that work at that company, they're like, oh, it's hell here,
Exactly.
right? And so that is something that is difficult to navigate, because everybody wants to appear diverse and inclusive and all of these things, but
Right.
they don't really put their money where their mouth is.
Mm-hmm.
And I think we're watching that kind of self destruct, because when you're doing DEI from an inauthentic place, I think you're creating even more polarity in your organization,
Mm-hmm.
because you have diversity statements going up on your website with no dialogue. And then the people who maybe are not aware or as, informed about the plight of marginalized communities, or whatever you want to label that,
Yeah.
um, they're getting confused and they're getting pissed off, and they're, what about me, right? So without the right type of dialogue and without the right intention, like all of these DEI efforts that are coming from a disingenuine place, or oh, let's put people of color on our college pamphlet so we can get more black students here, and then the black students show up and
Mm-hmm.
they're having a terrible experience. So
Mm-hmm.
it's kind of making us go backwards in a lot of ways, because the efforts are not authentic.
Yeah. I think too, like you said, it could almost backfire, because in the scenarios where I have seen that happen, like DEI work done from an authentic place, people recognized it. It wasn't like it went unnoticed. You know what I mean? So again, you can have those spaces, and like you said, I like what you said, like psychological safety. I think that's like the biggest thing, is like what does safety really mean or look like for everybody. And actually, that was going to be one of my things. It was going to be a later question, but I think this is a good time to bring it in. So like, how do you feel is the best way to like evaluate DEI work, like the effectiveness of it, right? So we put this program together. We create this affinity group, this whatever we want to call it. But then how do we know that we're making positive change?
Right. Well, I think there are metrics for those types of things. And so your metrics are going to be really determined by your company's vision and their mission and their specific goals. And so every goal looks different. But for example, if we want to keep diverse employees, but we're not paying attention to our retention rates and looking at the demographic breakdown of which demographics are leaving our company at higher levels,
Mm-hmm.
you're not going to be, you're not measuring the impact, right? So I think measuring the impact, knowing what metrics you're looking for that will lead to the goals that you want, is a good first place. And if you're absolutely clueless on where to start, I think you can never go wrong by engaging with your employees and
Mm-hmm.
by asking them, because right now we are at a very different time in workplace history. As millennials are entering the workforce and moving up in leadership and starting their own businesses, there are a lot of young people with really, really great ideas. But because they don't have that degree, or because they don't have the work experience, they're often overlooked when they can be really, really rich sources of wisdom and area for growth. Young people do tend to be kind of ahead of the curve, and we see things that are on the horizon. And so I think that young adults in the workplace need to be amplified. I think their voices need to be amplified, and they need to be given some decision making power and some influencing power, if we do want to see those changes.
That's awesome. Yeah, that's great. Um, so if we take a like just a bit of a step back, I do want to focus on some of your work, like the work you've actually been doing. So I guess going back to your sorority, can you tell us like what made you Well, I guess if you want to expand a little bit more about your sorority, because I know there's a lot that goes into it. So yeah, you want to tell us about that and like what made you join that particular sorority?
Yeah, so my sorority is Sigma Lambda Gamma National Sorority Incorporated. Um, we are a multicultural sorority that was formed in the 90s, well, 1990 to be exact. And Greek life is just one of those interesting topics, right? So I won't delve into the nuances of that too much, but what really attracted me to this organization was the vast multiculturalism represented in the organization. And so, as a biracial person, I think I always saw myself somewhere in the middle of all of these different worlds. I never felt like I was a white person, so like that became very clear from like a very young age. Like, okay, I'm clearly not one of them. But I always was aware of the fact that even in a room full of black people, like, and I'm the one mixed person there, like it's just different.
Mhm.
Um, and so I really, when I was in college and thinking about, Greek life decisions, like this organization really just struck out to me as an organization that, really represented multiculturalism on a global level. We had sisters from like over 120 different nationalities represented. And it was all about, empowering women. And so, yeah, it's been a really great journey. At this point,
Mhm.
a lot has happened.
Mhm.
A lot has happened, and I'll just say this: no organization is immune to the perils of DEI, right? Like even a national sorority, um, we've had to reckon with issues of race and gender and sexuality and creating an inclusive environment. And so like I've literally seen a lot of that unfold in my organization, and it's been a challenge. So
Mhm.
yeah, but at the time, like I was just so just interested and curious about learning about different cultures and
Mhm.
just forming sisterhood with people that on the surface we would never appear to have anything in common, but we're still able to find like a very deep, rich sisterhood. So.
Yeah, that's super cool. And then how did that, if it had any influence on you, like starting Reach Beyond Bias and kind of like moving into the Reaching podcast and stuff, like was any of that a part of that? Like, did it factor in, or were those kind of just coincidentally things that came together?
I think that they were both equally, important parts of my life, and I think everything that has been a part of my life has shaped me in some way.
Mhm.
I definitely think had I not joined that sorority at the time, like I don't know that I would have the same passion for, empowering women, and just in that whole, perspective that I have.
Mhm.
Um, Reaching beyond bias really happened around the same time, and so um, I think that joining my sorority really helped solidify my commitment to being a part of organizations that promote diversity and inclusion and and can promote that broadly, right? And so reaching beyond bias, I formed that shortly after kind of understanding what unconscious bias was and the effects. This was right around the time that the Trayvon Martin incident had happened and George Zimmerman wasn't, charged and people were protesting and it was just like so frustrating. Um, and so I connected the dots between unconscious bias and policing because, as much as I wanted to be like anti-police, like I understand the root of policing. Since then I've read a lot about that subject. Um, but I did have a hard time with the notion that like all police officers were just going out into the community and like looking for problems or right.
Mhm.
Like I recognize that the racism that we see in policing and in those outcomes,
Mhm.
I think are often tied to the unconscious biases. Now, obviously, there's systemic stuff too. Like there's a lot of history there, but again, at that time, I was just like, wow, if we could actually develop, awareness about this and help people understand what it is, understand that we all have it, that none of us are immune to it because it's just one of the things that happens in our brains,
Mhm.
that might be opportunity and that opportunity to address bias could actually save lives. Like that was, I think, the clear light bulb for me was just like, okay, racism is still a matter of life and death for people. Like there are people continuing to die because of outcomes in racism.
Mm,
And so we have to have a different sense of urgency. And so that really sparked my passion back then to create the platform, right?
mm,
And it's definitely evolved and took in a million turns since then. But yeah,
mm.
I remember, being that starry eyed, 20 something, like, we're gonna change the world, right?
Mhm.
And so in
Absolutely.
many ways I still am that person, but
Right.
growing
Gotta
up.
start somewhere. Gotta start somewhere. Okay. So then, can you kind of talk about how the podcast format came to be and what the mission is there?
Yeah, so back in 2015, I literally threw up the website, recorded a video, you would probably remember. Um, and it was just kind of like a campus wide initiative at the time where I'm like, I want everybody on campus to know what unconscious bias is. And I was in the student government. So I'm like, I'm gonna make sure that, we do something with this information. And so we put up the website, did the campaign, and it was great. We had really awesome feedback. And so from there, I was just like, well, I really would love to take this and run with it, right? Like, what more can I do under this umbrella? And so I was given the green light by one of the faculty members that I worked on the project with to, yeah, take it, see what you can do. And so for a couple of years, it was actually just collecting dust because I actually dropped out of Central Michigan University in 2016. So I dropped out of school, moved to Nashville, just living my life. Um, but reaching beyond bias was always in the back of my mind. Like it was always something that I know when I have the time, the resources, the whatever, like I got to come back to this.
Mm-hmm.
And so I decided to pitch reaching beyond bias in a competition. Start Garden, shout out to Start Garden. They're doing great things out here in Grand Rapids. So I decided to submit reaching beyond bias, and I was like, I want to use this money to invest in, some podcast equipment because um, I know podcasting is one of those platforms where, you can really reach a wide audience depending on, what your topic is. And I just wanted that freedom to just express and like put this message out there. And so I didn't win the competition, but I did win some mentors, and maybe we'll get into that later. But
Mm-hmm.
uh, yeah, I just decided to launch the podcast under the Reaching Beyond Bias platform because I felt like we had a potential to reach a really, great audience and just to have rich dialogues about all of these issues that get us super fired up. And I do have to really quick shout out because I saw Mariah in the comments, my
Yeah, let me grab
co-host,
it back up there. Yeah,
watching. So
exactly. So shout her out. Thanks, Mariah, for tuning in. Appreciate you.
yeah,
But
and so Mariah is also a sister too, and so that's kind of why some of this comes
oh,
full
cool,
circle. Because me and Mariah met in our college days at CMU, and
cool.
then when I was getting to the point where I was like, I'm ready to do a podcast, she actually texted me and was like, "Hey, have you ever thought of doing a podcast?" And I was like,
Mm,
"Matter of fact," like I
mhm.
just showed her, some of the stuff I've been working on, and she has been an amazing partner and collaborator ever since, and a lifelong friend. So it's been
Oh,
amazing.
that's incredible. That's amazing. And I love the fact that too, you didn't obviously you said it was on the back of your mind, so you didn't let it like die or fade away, but you found a more modern way to kind of bring the information to light. Because I think right now podcasts are obviously just like a really popular way people consume content and information. Like people aren't really reading as much in terms of like articles and things like that. So I think a podcast, especially any sort of like audio visual content, is just like a great way to get your message out there. So it's really cool to see you pivot it into that. Um,
Yeah.
so then going into like how you got involved. So you mentioned like you moved to Nashville. So how did you get involved in like the DEI scene in Grand Rapids in West Michigan? How'd that come about?
Well, my family does have origins here in Grand Rapids. So I have a grandfather that worked for Grand Rapids Department of Parks and Recreation. And so he ran a basketball program for 30 years. And so he's influenced a lot of people, a lot of young folks in the community. And he was a mentor, for a lot of folks. So I always knew about Grand Rapids, used to come out here, come to church and stuff like that. But like I said, I grew up, a little bit further west, a little bit more conservative town.
Mhm.
And so in 2019, I was just really looking to do something different. I felt like my time in Nashville had been a little bit stagnant. I was having a great time connecting with family and all of that. But I just was like, I'm not doing work that I'm passionate about. And I just really wanted a fresh start. So I literally moved to Grand Rapids with nothing but what I could fit in my car, and just literally started fresh.
Mm.
And so over the last 3 years, I've built a community of people that it's almost amazing. It's almost it is amazing.
Mhm.
The people that I've been able to become community with and form, almost like a family. So yeah, it's been, sorry, it's just like so much has happened over the last few years that it's really amazing to be in this position.
That's awesome.
And so I'm just kind of like reminiscing and telling this whole story, and it's just like, wow.
Yeah, taking it all in. Can you tell us about some of the projects you've been on out there? I know you've done like some film stuff and some like events and things like that. So can you talk about like kind of how you're moving that work forward out there?
Yeah, so under Reaching Beyond Bias, I'm still kind of building that. The end goal with that is to really be in a space of like consulting and, be able to help do workshops and stuff like that in the community. So the
Mhm.
podcast, we also do a cheat sheet, or at least we used to. So our cheat sheet was just full of like all of our supplemental resources and references and stuff. So that was a really fun project to be a part of. Uh,
Mhm.
I've also been in the poetry scene. So I've been doing poetry for like my entire life, honestly. Last fall, I started a platform called Pass a Mic. And so that was a really, really incredible experience. We had so many incredibly talented artists, and essentially we curated a lineup of all local talent from really diverse, eclectic kind of backgrounds. So we had comedians, we had rappers,
Mm.
local DJ, instrumentalists, and we would throw this open mic slash artist showcase in this really beautiful gallery down on the southeast side. So that's
Mm.
one of the things that I've been, building. The documentary project is definitely one of those full circle crazy opportunities. So I came across this project doing some research about West Michigan Nice, and had already been working with Mariah and building the podcast and just kind of building this audience here in Grand Rapids, talking about our social issues. And so we started talking about a city within a city on the podcast. And I was in school doing some research about just like the history of just West Michigan and how racism has kind of pervaded over time. And
Mm.
so I was reading this book. It's called A City Within a City,
Mhm.
and it's about the Black freedom struggle in Grand Rapids. And so it's from about the 1920s era all the way into like the early 70s. And
Mm.
so as I'm reading this book, and I'm just like, wow, like connecting all these dots about West Michigan Nice and this concept called managerial racism, which is just kind of a very complex system of keeping Black people as patrons of the system.
Mm.
And so I found out later that there was a film crew local that was gearing up to create a documentary based on the book. And so I just started showing my face at their events and supporting and just offering my time. And then it's been just over a year and some change since I've been engaging with them and have actually gotten to be an apprentice on their film set. I've been shadowing a line producer who's like based out in LA, just learning all the ins and outs of, logistics, and it's been amazing. We're also working on like a whole apprenticeship program where other media professionals that are either, Grand Rapids or local. I know we've had some folks from Detroit area come through and be on our sets. So our goal is to really um, use our platform and this work that we're doing to push forward what I would call narrative justice.
Mm.
And narrative justice is important to me because it's all about allowing people to tell their own stories,
Mm.
and equipping, not just allowing, but equipping communities, diverse communities, with the resources and the education and the skill set that they need in this day and age to tell their own stories.
Mhm.
So we have people shadowing, our director and our camera operators and our everybody, and it's
Mhm.
just been so uplifting and inspiring.
That's dope because I mean, obviously, media is like a huge part of just anything, right? You said like pushing. narratives, messages, like anything. So yeah, I definitely think telling your own stories is really important. So that's very cool. Okay, so kind of getting to like winding down to like the closing a little bit. I guess one thing I'm curious about is like, what do you want people to take away from this entire talk? Like, yeah, what's your biggest message to people regarding DEI work?
I would say my one of my biggest messages is that if you're in DEI work in any way, or if it's a field that you're interested in pursuing, above all else, radical self care. The last thing that we need is more people doing work and being burnt out and being exhausted and frustrated. I think now more than ever, it's really time that we come together and we heal our communities and we take care of ourselves and we resist. And I think that our community has earned the right, and it's our birthright to rest. And so that's something that I'm really trying to embody, is making sure that I'm taking time to keep myself whole and happy, and just working on myself. So I would just say, self first, followed by never give up on your dreams. You're going to go through plenty of periods where it feels frustrating or it feels impossible, and just with the right level of persistence and consistency, like, you can literally do anything. And if you have a vision that's clear in your mind, don't let anybody or anything take that from you, because we need people that think like that in order for us to really achieve justice. And that's, I guess, the last thing that I'll leave people with. I'm starting to shift a little bit away from using DEI. And I came across a term that I like because it's quirky and it's weird, but it's Jedi, and it's JEDI. And justice is that missing link, in my opinion. I think we can talk about diversity and inclusion and all of these things all day, but I think that we are losing sight of justice. And that can mean a lot of different things for a lot of different people in a lot of different spaces. But one thing for sure is that if we are going to have a just society, people need to be able to use their voices. They need to speak up, and they need to be relentless, because we have had, generations and generations of people before us that have made sacrifices, to get us to where we are today, and we cannot let any of that be in vain. So the time to act, the time to get engaged, to be thoughtful, and to figure out how we can make the world a better place is today. Um, so yeah, that's what I would
What's
leave you.
what's up? Um, in the next 3 to 5 years, like what sort of impact do you hope that the work you're doing today will have in the West Michigan slash like Grand Rapids area?
You know, that's such a tough question. I think if anything, I would just love to see more collectivist efforts. I would like to see just more coalition building, more people coming together in unity and being aligned, and taking care of ourselves and taking care of our community. So I have no idea what the next 3 to 5 years are going to look like. I can't even fathom what the next year is going to look like,
Mm.
considering everything that's happening, globally and nationally. We are certainly in the most uncertain time period that we've probably ever seen. Um, but I believe that what we're doing and the conversations that we're having will make a difference. I believe that we have the power to create the reality that we want.
Mm.
That is better. That is the best reality for the most possible people. I believe that wholeheartedly. And so I refuse to lose sight of that. No matter how hard it gets, no matter how crazy the world is, I believe that everything that we do up here, we can make happen out there. Um, And so if enough of us believe, and if enough of us are willing to do the work in our individual lanes by being our authentic selves, like, we don't all have to be out there boots on the ground, right? Like, we don't all have to be running for mayor. We don't all have to be looking at the C-suite like, oh, I want to be CEO. No, like
Mm-hmm.
you can do whatever it is that you're called to do and be authentically you and still fight for justice and still make a difference. So
Absolutely. Absolutely. Um, I promise. Couple more and then we're done. I swear. All right.
okay.
So, all right, on this one, who would your like dream collaborators be on any sort of, it doesn't even have to be like DEI specific, it could be like a creative endeavor, it could be DEI related. Who would be some people you would like to collaborate with in the dream world?
Oh man. I really hope that this comes true. Okay. So Adrienne Marie Brown has been somebody that I've been obsessed with for the last few months. She's actually based out in Detroit, so I really hope that she hears me fangirling her one day. Um, she is an author that I've recently come across, and she does a ton of work in the justice realm, and just has such a holistic approach to the way she, frames all of these conversations. So if you haven't read anything by Adrienne Marie Brown, please do. So she's definitely somebody I would love to collaborate with. I would have to also say Michelle Alexander, and again fangirling because the first book that I ever read in this kind of like genre of diversity, justice, whatever, and like really loved was her book, The New Jim Crow, and
Mm,
I read it in high school and it literally changed my whole entire like paradigm.
mm.
Probably why I'm so passionate about DEI now could be traced to like when I read that book. And then I got to meet her in college and she signed my book. So that was great. Love to work with her.
Mm.
And then Oprah. I'm just going to say Oprah because who wouldn't want to work with Oprah?
I
We
have
have
one
this
star
same
in there.
birthday.
Yeah.
So me and her are both Aquariuses. We have the same birthday. I would love to just like throw my 30th birthday party with Oprah. So
That's
we'll
what's
see.
up. Any resources that you have for anybody watching? Things that I know. I remember. I think there was like an unconscious bias test that you had on the site like back before. Any other things like that, like actionable things people can kind of do to get more aware or engage with this type of work?
Yeah, there's a lot of actionable things that people can do. And I would say I would start by just reading. Like I know not everybody's a reader, so there's audiobooks and stuff like that. But I think that people need to challenge their minds intellectually. They need to be thinking about all of this stuff from as many different angles as they possibly can, and then meditating on what it means. I don't think enough people are even bothering to open up a book and dissect and have an understanding of historical context and of the lived experiences of people that are unlike themselves. And I would say on both sides of this, like,
Mm,
even as, I mean, I guess I could be labeled as a liberal, right? Pretty obvious, but I don't really subscribe to labels like that. But I mean, I like reading books that were written by more conservative minded folks.
exactly.
It just makes sense to understand
Mm,
who you're dealing with.
mm,
So y'all read a book, any book. Just start
yeah,
reading a book.
I like that. Being open to different perspectives too. Yeah.
Yeah, just always adapt that attitude of being a lifelong learner.
Mm,
I think we all just think we all have it all figured out, or just get curious, get excited.
mm.
Um and if you really have that genuine interest and excitement, like the dots will start to connect.
Absolutely. All right. So before we let you go, Shayna, is there anything you want to shout out? Website, links, social media, anything you want people to go check out?
I mean, obviously, you can go to reachingBeyondBias.org and check out, some of the work that I've been doing over the last few years. A couple podcast episodes won't hurt ya. But locally, I will uplift a few of my favorite community organizations. I'll start with the Grand Rapids Media Initiative and Film Incubator, aka GR MiFi. They're a nonprofit organization that is working to bridge the gap in achievement and talent in the media space here locally. So we definitely are interested in collaborators through that organization. Also, Grandstand Pictures. They are the ones that are responsible for the documentary project, A City Within a City, and they are doing incredible work. So I just always have to shout those two out. And then I'll also shout out the Urban Core Collective. I recently went through this leadership cohort called the Transformational Leadership Program,
Mm-hmm.
and it was completely life-changing. And I got to connect with about 25, 30 other up and coming leaders in the community. And like, we are going to be doing some big things. So definitely tap in with the Urban Core Collective. And if I'm forgetting anybody, Mariah's in the comments. And
Yeah, I wanted to make sure we got this up there because I thought these were some great suggestions too. Mariah says libraries, programs, community events, podcasts, having open conversations with family, friends, and elders, which I think are all really great things to be doing as well too. Appreciate you, Mariah. But yeah, thank you, Shayna. Appreciate you so much for coming by and just sharing all this with us. Wishing you the best for all the work you continue to do, and yeah, we appreciate you stopping by.
well, thanks for having me. It's definitely a pleasure and a full circle moment. And so,
Yeah,
definitely supporting Links and Lines. And I hope to see a lot more episodes in the future. So,
no doubt. Appreciate you, Shayna. Talk soon.
see you.
Yeah.